Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. This is Season 3, Episode 14 of our NFL coverage, and today, obviously, we will be covering the championship games as well as giving our picks for the Super Bowl. Just before we get started, I would just want to say that if you're enjoying the content, please like and subscribe and comment. It helps us out tremendously, as well as check us out on other platforms, Spotify, TikTok, or check out the playlist and watch some of our other episodes, and all of that's down in the description below. And then one more thing on top of that is just wanted to give a shout out to Gardner Minshew for being selected as the playoff alternate, or the Pro Bowl alternate for Patrick Mahomes. It's always cool to see a guy like that get the opportunity to do that, because he's a great quarterback, but I mean, we all know what his ceiling is. So to see him still have a chance to be able to make a Pro Bowl, that's just pretty cool. That's got to be a cool moment for him. So hat it off to him. And so I'm wearing the shirt to rep him because I thought that was fitting. But to get in now to our playoff coverage, we are going to be starting with the Chiefs and Ravens, where the Chiefs upset the Ravens, who were a pretty heavy favorite. Wilson, what were your takeaways from this game?
Yeah, this one was an interesting one. Just seeing that line really move in heavily towards the favor of the Ravens before kickoff. I think they had started when the line had opened at around 3.5. And by the time the game had started, on some of the books, you could get them for -5. So it was kind of interesting to see a rally around kind of the Ravens. And just a lot of people, right? I think just a lot of media personalities, a lot of the general public really had a belief that the Ravens were going to take this one away, and heavily, not even close, right? Not even within that field goal kind of point spread. And I think what we saw in the game, the number one thing that stood out to me was the Chiefs defense. To me, really looked like it was the best defense across football this year. And I think, the postseason is one thing up against the regular season. The regular season stats would have told you that Baltimore's was the first by a wide margin, right? They had 60 sacks, I think was most in the league. Number one scoring defense. They were top 5 in yards. The Ravens defense really didn't resemble that in the early part of that game. They really let that Chiefs offense kind of break the game open with a couple of touchdowns. And I think in part that changed the way the Ravens attacked the game. And I think it kind of forced them out of what their game plan would have been going into the game. We really saw them get away from the run. And again, I want to just put a lot of the credit on that Chiefs defense. Steve Spagnuolo is a guy that has not gotten a lot of credit over the last couple of years, particularly because a lot of the years the Chiefs defense has not been great. But you and I have talked about before in the past, it has been a pretty solid postseason defense, in part because they've been able to generate a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. We just know that's something that's incredibly important down the stretch in a lot of these playoff games. And start to finish, just a really nice performance by the Chiefs defense. I think there were a lot of Ravens mistakes that they'd like to have back. A couple untimely fumbles. Obviously, the goal line play for Zay Flowers is definitely one he will want to have back. But I think all in all, again, just that Chiefs defense really showed that they were one of the top units across all of football this year. And to me, it was really surprising to see them. They just weren't talked a lot at all, right? They were the primary reason the Chiefs were able to even get into the playoffs, with that offense really struggling and really sputtering out at various points in the season. It was that consistent defense, hasn't given up over 30 points a game in any game this season. Just really one of the most consistent and steadfast units in football.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great, I think, way to look at it. This game was just, I think, a surprise for everyone. I was very heavy on the Ravens. I bet the Ravens. I was just very confident. And I think that came from a lot of things. One, we were talking about championship pedigree and how the Mahomes especially has such a good record as the starter in the playoffs, but most of those games they'd been hosting. So we hadn't really gotten an opportunity to see them away. And that was one of the reasons I was leaning Ravens as well. I just assumed with them getting home field advantage, they play like it. But just plain and simple, they didn't. They looked out-coached in a capacity I haven't seen in the NFL playoffs in a very long time. It looked like the fact that this game was even close speaks to me volumes of the playmakers on this team and not necessarily the team itself or the coaching. Todd Monken really crapped the bed of someone I've been high on all year. The fact that you only hand off the ball 8 times and you're a rush first offense, that's just never something that should happen. It's ridiculous in all honesty. And your running backs only got 6 of those touches. Lamar outran your whole team. That's, again, a luxury to have. It's not what you can rely on. And then the Chiefs, on the other hand, I mean, Lamar threw for more yards than Mahomes, threw a lot more inefficiently, but they also had 4 drops on offense. Again, it just looked like a offense that was firing on no cylinders. Mark Andrews finally came back, had a good week of practice, was a full participant over half the week, only got 2 targets the entire game and likely was in on a lot of the plays that I would have liked to see Andrews in. Not to mention, they just really did not want to call a penalty on Likely. Likely had 2 pretty bad pass interferences that weren't called. So I know you can't go into a game expecting that, but once I saw that, I'd put in a guy like Andrews just because he'll know how to, put his hands on the guy and fight back a little bit and not draw the whistle. And it just, again, it was a team that looked completely outclassed. I don't even think the Chiefs offense played that well at all. Travis Kelce was the only player, in my opinion, who had a great game on offense for the Chiefs. Mahomes was averaging under 5 yards in attempt until the Valdez-Scantling deep ball, and Isaiah Pacheco came in injured, still put up a respectable 70 yards of scrimmage, but just wasn't, the sort of explosive playmaker we'd seen in these playoffs. But Travis Kelce once again showed why, in my opinion, he's the greatest tight end of all time and just truly dominated again against the team with good safeties and linebackers. He was being guarded by Kyle Hamilton, one of the best young safeties in the league. Roquan and Pat Queen were playing him underneath, again, 2 of the best linebackers in the league, and he still just had a monstrous day. And I mean, just gets open effortlessly. And on the deep shot to Martez Valdez-Scantling, you can watch that play back. Mahomes in his press conference, I noticed this. He was talking about how the Ravens sent an all-out blitz, and that's why MVS was so open. But that's not true. The Ravens were bracketing Travis Kelce. He had safety over top and someone underneath on him, so that's what allowed him to get wide open. The safety was playing dedicated to Travis as well as a backer. So his impact on that game cannot be overstated. To me, I mean, he was what won them this game. They would not have 17 points if it wasn't for him. I mean, almost half of Mahomes' passing yards were him, and 10 catches against, again, one of the best defensive units of all time. I don't know how we aren't talking more about this Travis Kelce performance, because it really was one of the best tight end performances I've seen in the playoffs in a long time.
And I think arguably the best game of Kelsey's career, when you just consider kind of the stakes and the point at where, how this Chiefs offense has been playing all year. I've been really shocked all week by kind of the commentary around the game, and so much of the credit going to Mahomes, right? When we look at this game, outside of the first half points, right? And it was really 2 touchdown drives to open the game, a bunch of punts. Obviously, they got the field goal with the help on a couple of penalties going into the half. And then in the second half, until the end of the game, the Chiefs punted on every single possession, a lot of those 3 and out. And to hear so much of the credit kind of go to this offensive mastermind game manager performance, again, I think Mahomes did his job and not making mistakes, but it's not exactly like he was out there just dealing. And again, I also think, and I've said this the last couple of weeks, I think part of that was by design, right? The Chiefs have known, or at least, on the Chiefs side, they really believe in that defense. And I think it's made the offense play a lot more conservative than they have in the past. And, the pros of that, you're not going to turn the ball over, no fumbling or no picks. But on the flip side, there's also no explosiveness until that MVS play. And that was literally on the last Chiefs drive of the game, really just trying to run clock away. It wasn't necessarily in a position they're trying to score, right? They're just trying to get the downs in order to run out the clock. And so again, I think it all goes back to the Chiefs have just had a super, super reliable defense all year. They've really just trusted Mahomes to not make the mistakes, right? 6 consecutive playoff games without a pick, hardly taken any sacks. He took 2 in this one. But again, I think it's 5 over his last 6. So really just a bunch of 0 sack game performances. And what we've seen just since that AFC title game loss against the Bengals, Mahomes has really turned himself into this super, super conservative and safe player in the playoffs, which has been really interesting. And again, I want to give him credit for doing that because, in a game where the Ravens made a lot of mistakes, the Chiefs didn't make a lot. But again, I don't think that made him the game changer, right? The game elevator in this one on the offensive side, like you pointed out, was Kelce. And it really just tore up anything Baltimore was trying to do defensively because of the amount of attention they were having to put on him. And, in a low scoring game, the Chiefs were able to stay up 2 possessions for most of the game. And because they were able to build that lead off of Travis Kelce, again, that was the game difference here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think of the winning QBs this weekend, I would say Brock Purdy made more substantial plays than Mahomes, which is, again, just a crazy thing because as me and Wilson have both gone on record, we think he's very much a product of that system, but he really used his legs and stepped up, especially in that comeback. And Mahomes, again, played like more of a game manager, which is kind of funny to say, but his goal was to not lose him that game, not to take deep shots that he didn't need. A lot of, instead of when he's rolling out to his left when he could have ripped it downfield for a chance, he just wasn't throwing the interception. I mean, he had 14 this year, and a lot of that was because he was just trying to do too much. It's one of the reasons Tom Brady was so great. Tom Brady, you can't tell me is a top 5 ball thrower of all time. The way the dude threw the ball, nothing was special about it, but it was just the mentality and the way he approached the game. He understood once it came this ugly, December football, so many of his playoff games were low scoring because he understood, look, I just have to keep my offense on the field so my defense can be rested so they can come out, make a splash play, and I got to score 20 points to win consistently. And that's kind of what Mahomes has done in this playoff run, where he's taking more of the Tom Brady approach to winning, which is, again, I'm just going to do everything in my power to control everything. I want to have the ball in my hands as much as possible. And when they weren't able to do that, it didn't matter because the defense took over. This is a Chiefs team that to me heavily resembles a lot of those Patriots teams, where it's a quarterback tight end connection and a lot of receivers that can just kind of be plugged in, a solid running back. They have someone out the backfield who can catch passes. They have a gadget guy, but the defense is what carries them, especially corners. Again, very similar to the Patriots years of prior. It's just funny to see Andy Reid, someone I hail as the greatest offensive mind in NFL history, to be coaching for a defensive game. It's very interesting and something I don't think he would have done earlier in his career.
And I think, again, it speaks to the pedigree and the maturation that we've talked about with the Chiefs over the last couple of weeks, really in particular. Just being able to go out there and execute a game plan that might go against the nature of Reid or Mahomes, right? They were really able to go out there and play conservative ball when what's really made them the Chiefs of the last couple of years is that high-flying deep ball offense, right? And obviously not having Tyreek Hill is a huge difference, but it's not like MVS isn't a deep threat, right? Like, we saw it at the end of the game. If they wanted to, they could go for that more often. We saw a couple plays against Buffalo. And again, I just think it speaks to the team knowing how to win. They've just been there so many times. They came in there with a serious game plan and they just executed it to a T. I talked a little bit about Spagnuolo here, but I think the OC or the DC that you get to retain on your team for an extended period of time is kind of an underrated part of these NFL coaching circles, right? The Patriots had it all those years with Josh McDaniels, right? After he had flamed out in his first stint as a head coach, he wasn't going to get an opportunity for quite a number of years. And because of that allowed Brady and him to be the offensive side of the ball, right? And then we know Belichick, with a rotating kind of field of defensive coordinators, he was going to be able to pick up the slack. And a lot of what we've seen, I think, with the Chiefs this year is that, but exactly in reverse, right? Where, Andy Reid, it doesn't matter that Bieniemy is no longer part of that. He's going to be good enough to keep that offense afloat most weeks. And, we've criticized the offense a lot. They were still a top 15 offensive unit across the league. It's not like they had no, potential to put touchdowns. It wasn't exactly like the Jets out there. And on the flip side, we've seen now Steve's been with that defense for 5 years now. And, they had the shirts at the end of the game, which I thought was really cool, and Spags we trust. And I think it just speaks to kind of the consistency in that defensive unit, right? The players talk about a lot. It's a hard scheme for players to know, and just to have the same guy at the helm of that defense for the last couple of years has been something that's really helped Kansas City out with their consistency. And again, I think it all kind of combines together in having championship pedigree and just the know-how if you've been there and you know how to go out there and execute.
Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly what Spags does. He does a lot of exotic blitzes, and they were talking about how it's kind of a hard system, but being there for a while, it is what's made it so successful. And Lamar, one of the biggest critiques early in his career has been against pressure. Now, the O-line finally was playing better this year, playing consistently, got healthy, but then in this game, they just did not look like that at all. Lamar looked like he didn't want to run. The O-line didn't look like they want to block. Everything on this team looked disjointed. And I saw things about Odell was made a snide comment at Lamar about trying to run more. Odell claims to be a top 5 receiver all time by his own accord. Where were you in that game? You had 20 yards on 6 targets, and they were physical catches, and there was maybe a missed PI or two. But I mean, if you're going to be talking to your quarterback like that, I know, the diva receiver is kind of the moniker. A lot of, it's kind of what the position group is known for. A lot of the high end talent is more exotic, but usually at least you get some stellar performances with that. And Odell with this team has been, I think it's pretty fair to say, lackluster. I mean, only having 500 yards and being, again, he was one of my favorite players of all time. He's one of the reasons I root for the Giants still today. But I just, all of the players I expected for them to show up didn't show up, and a lot of them weren't even used. Like I said about Mark Andrews, only getting 2 targets on the game is just criminal to me. Rashad Bateman's a guy Lamar's had really good chemistry with the last few weeks. He only gets 1 catch the whole game. The game just looked disjointed from the beginning. They didn't look like they knew where they were on offense and defense, and the defense kind of fixed things out in the second half. But again, I think a lot of that was more the Chiefs offense was just playing passively. I mean, again, as I said,
They're taking
Mahomes was,
everything underneath.
yeah, Mahomes was just Tom Bradying it away. I'm going to dink and dunk and play the most boring offensive game ever, but I'm just going to make sure that we keep the ball and that we don't turn it over and that we can score enough to outscore you guys. And that's just what it was. It was a team that executed their game plan, and another team that looked like they just didn't even have one. I don't know if I've ever seen that level of incompetence at the AFC Championship, especially for a team I'm so high on, because the Ravens, that's the one thing they haven't looked like all year, is incompetent. And they have had some close games with bad teams. That is kind of a critique of theirs. But again, I don't want my team to blow out everyone, or then you get like a Bills the few years ago, right? That team that was averaging like a 20-point victory blows out the Patriots in the first round, can't hang in a close game, right? That's not what you want. You want someone who's seen both, and the Ravens have. And the fact that they came into this game with seemingly no game plan, I really just don't know what level of the organization to blame. But I mean, to me, this was complete organizational failure from top to bottom, from players, the head coaching staff to management. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know if the coaches were thinking about their interviews they're getting for head coaching gigs, or what, but it just a mind-blowing situation for me, for a team to blow their opportunity that badly.
Yeah, and to kind of continue on your point here, I think it was just so puzzling to see the game plan, or whatever resemblance of a game plan the Ravens had going into the game, fall apart so quickly just because the Chiefs were able to go up a couple of scores. And I think it raises this question on whether or not, and I think we've seen it with the Bills a couple times, where I think as bad as the Chiefs offense has looked all year, right? That's been the point all year. People want to harp on that. I think there's an element of, the Ravens changed what they were doing because the Chiefs went up, right? All of a sudden they went away from the run that had been so good for them all year. And I think another element of this, and you kind of alluded to it, but the Ravens hadn't been in a lot of these really tight contested games against really good teams. And because they hadn't been in those positions before, I think they kind of got out of character, right? The Chiefs have been in a lot of what you would call clutch game situations this year, and they've come out on the wrong side of a lot of them. But again, I think through that, as you're kind of earning your stripes and just getting experience so many different end of game situations, the Chiefs just executed so well, and the Ravens just did everything the opposite. It's a smallism, you can disagree with the call, but the Zay Flowers taunting, right? I think that's a thing where, like, in that position you have to know you can't take that penalty, and I know they got the yardage back, but it's the play that allowed kind of the mistake to then happen, right? Without that, a different set of circumstances, Snead doesn't punch the ball out, and all of a sudden it's a different score game. And I just think there are elements of that not being in that environment before. I think it's just important, and it's why, in a perfect world, you'd go undefeated the entire way. But I think there's something to be said about going, 12-5, or 13-4, right? And having a couple of really tough losses that really force you to evaluate where you're at and what things you need to change, because the Ravens had blown on everybody at the top. And all of a sudden they got kind of punched back for a minute, and it really just phased them. And like you said, it just looked like they had no idea what they were doing under the lights in that spot.
Well, and something I was very disappointed by, and this is to get a little more into the X's and O's of things, is the lack of usage from Pat Ricard in this game, as well as I've already mentioned, Mark Andrews was just very puzzling to me, because to me, if I'm the Ravens and the run game wasn't working, well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put my best blockers out there. Pat Ricard, one of the most underrated fullbacks in the league, only played 26% of snaps this week compared to 57 last week. And in a lot of the games the Ravens convincingly win, he's playing over 40% of snaps because they're really establishing the run and sticking to it because they're getting success with it. The run game wasn't working, so why wasn't he in there more to try to shake things up? Mark Andrews is back. He's a phenomenal blocker. Put him, Kolar, Ricard, and Zay out there. Just run heavy personnel with one deep threat out there. Jesus, Zay Flowers was the only receiver who was playing decent for him. Put 3 tight ends in there. Put your fullback in there. I don't care. Try something. And they just didn't. They were spreading out the receivers and then trusting that Lamar could make a play against. By the end of the game, Spagnuolo was just sitting in like a stock cover 2 and putting contains against Lamar to keep him from running outside, but he kept giving him right up the middle. He just wouldn't take it. I really just don't understand. I know, just kind of reiterating what you were saying, it was so uncharacteristically bad across the board. Their entire game plan to me just, it made no sense. And I can't really make a game plan from what they did. Their game plan felt like we're just going to get there and see what happens. It didn't feel premeditated at all, while the Chiefs felt extremely premeditated, almost frustratingly so when Mahomes wouldn't take chances downfield. I mean, that's what makes the Chiefs fun to watch. And I've harped on these playoffs a lot. I've said this is one of the most boring playoffs we've had the last few years, at least that I can think of. And again, for the Chiefs, that's been benefiting them because of their defense. But the Ravens just looked bad. I mean, so bad. Like, not a playoff team bad. Like, almost all of the other teams that had already lost, I think, could have played more competently in the playoffs than this Ravens team did, which is just mind-boggling to me. I just truly do not understand what happened in this game and why the Ravens collapsed so bad.
Yeah, and they really chose the worst time of the year to do it. And I think the last thing I would mention is I think this kind of puts the proverbial monkey back on the back of Lamar and kind of this narrative around playoff struggles, right? Again, I know he had more yards than Mahomes, but I think, just looking at kind of how the game evolved, Lamar really wasn't able to make any plays when the Ravens really needed to. And kind of some of the plays that he was making, again, they kind of just shot themselves in the foot with some of those mistakes down the stretch when they finally were able to start moving the ball against that Chiefs defense. So I think it'll be an interesting to monitor over the next couple of years, because we'll talk about the Super Bowl in a little bit here, but this is now the Chiefs are kind of just running through the AFC, right? And when you've got elite quarterbacks like Burrow, Jackson, Josh Allen, and then hopefully Herbert's going to look like something with Harbaugh. There's a lot of quarterback talent in that AFC that's kind of running into this buzzsaw that has turned out to be the Chiefs, and I think it'll be an interesting thing to kind of monitor moving forward.
I will say, just to kind of counteract that point, I do think this is kind of almost an unfair year, though, to say that the Chiefs are like, I saw that headline that like, are they going to restrict talent, and make a lot of Super Bowl list quarterbacks? And I just think that's silly, because look at a year like with the Bengals, where they were not even remotely healthy that year. Joe Burrow got sacked 7 times in the divisional round, and they still ended up going through the playoffs and beating Mahomes. So I think that's a little exaggerated. I think once these teams get healthy, because the Chiefs, all things considered, extremely healthy for the playoffs. They were missing Willie Gay on the defense and Joe Thuney. But as I said, I mean, their replacements, Drew Tranquill played one of the best games of anybody in that game, and he was a replacement player, right? Very next man up. Same thing with Thuney's replacement. I can't remember his name right now, and I don't have it written down for some reason, but he played a great game. I'm pretty sure he only allowed a pressure on the day, so played a phenomenal game. So I don't think necessarily that, they're this all-encompassing force. I think a lot of teams now are finally starting to get built back up. COVID really kind of reset everything. And I think what we saw is the elite franchises had stayed elite, while the ones that you don't think of necessarily as elite ones have struggled a lot, right? So newly good teams like the Browns, right? We thought they were going to be competitive for the next few years. They've struggled a lot, right? And I think COVID was a big part of that. While as you see teams like San Fran or the Chiefs, they've been good the last 10 years. So naturally they're going to still be good. So I don't necessarily think that's, to say they're this all encompassing force, as well as now when the salary cap continues to hit, as well as Travis Kelce potentially retiring here soon, or Andy Reid. I just think there's a lot of, question marks for the Chiefs. So I think definitely, they're in a good position right now. And once the salary cap has this huge jump that they're anticipating, I think they'll be able to retool a little bit, but so will everybody else, and everybody else will have a chance to get healthy. So I definitely think, again, the Chiefs are the best team in the league right now and have been for the last few years, but I don't think, everyone's acting like they're, this all encompassing, like people are talking about them like they're the 60s Celtics teams, where they were making it 11 out of the 13, like that's just silly, we won't ever see that level of dominance again,
Yeah.
and to insinuate that the Chiefs are going to be like that when literally another team did exactly what they did like 10 years ago.
Yes.
This isn't something we haven't seen before, but look at those Patriots teams. They did get less dominant as time goes on. Father Time's undefeated, right? And those pieces will start revolving. And these issues the Chiefs had this year, you'll start to notice issues every year. And then eventually, it will be time for, the modern day Chiefs dynasty to end. But I do think for the next few years, they are going to be the team to beat. But all those people saying they're going to essentially prevent Herbert or Burrow from winning a Super Bowl, I think that's silly.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think what has been most humorous to me in this kind of dialogue around the Chiefs is all year you heard so many people, and you weren't one of these people, but so many people kind of talking about how, this is the year the Chiefs don't do anything, right? People were, calling them to, being out in the wild card round or the divisional round. And again, to see them, I think now the narrative has flipped so quickly, right? All of a sudden the Chiefs have a couple upset wins against the Vegas line, and now people want to claim them as, an unbeatable, unstoppable force when that hasn't been the narrative around them all year long. And I think the truth is somewhere, like you're saying, closer to the middle, where again they are proving to be the class of the NFL this year, or at least in the AFC. But we know how quickly playoff teams and just turnover on NFL rosters happens, right? There's a stat out there. I think 4 or 5 teams every single year that don't make the playoffs the year before make it the year after. And it's why, right? Like, many people would have pegged the Joe Burrow Bengals to not miss the playoffs for an extended period of time, and a couple untimely injuries go your way. Obviously, you're not sitting in that position anymore. So I do think it's all relative, and just kind of having a consistent narrative around, yes, they are, they did overcome some of the odds this year. But like that doesn't automatically just make them this unstoppable dynasty. And again, I think the Super Bowl conversation will be interesting in a minute because again, the Niners are favorites. So the Chiefs are now an underdog for the third consecutive playoff matchup for them. So
Yeah, no, I agree. And with that, we'll go into the next game and the last game of the divisional weekend, being Lions Niners. Obviously, Lions got up early, big, and now are the only team to have a 17-point lead going into halftime and lose the NFC champion or a championship game. Excuse me, Wilson. What were your takeaways with this game?
yeah, while I picked the Niners to win going into the game, this is not the way I would have necessarily seen the game playing out. And for a narrative of, the Kyle Shanahan Niners can't come back from a deficit, again, that's one of those narratives that has flipped itself on its head real quickly, with the Niners coming back from back-to-back deficits in the third quarter of the first game, and then now the first half of this one. You and I have talked a lot about Purdy throughout this year, whether or not he's an MVP caliber player, and I want to stay consistent. I don't think Purdy should have won the NFL MVP. At the same time, I can admit that he has shown the ability to make more plays than I expected and projected him out to be. And again, I want to I hate to use it as a crutch, but part of it is because he has Debo, C-Mac, Kittle, Ayuk on that roster, right? They are able to just make some freakish catch, and once they're able to get out in space with the ball, they make magical things happen out there on the field. But I want to give credit to Purdy because he's kind of he at least surpassed my expectations. And I also want to give a little bit of credit to Kyle Shanahan. I've talked a lot about how I think his scheme is a little too rigid and how the Niners have struggled to adjust, leading in part to their inability to come back from these deficits. And I think, the Niners did a really good job to kind of push back against both of those things, with Purdy making plays, particularly with his legs, right? Showing that ability to scramble on a couple key downs and just extend plays is not something that I thought he had the ability to do. He had shown flashes of it, but definitely didn't see him scrambling for multiple first downs in the second half of just really making game winning drives there at the end. So credit to Shanahan, credit to Purdy, excuse me. And I think we'll talk about it in a minute, but I do think there's something to be said about kind of just the coaching decisions on the Lions side of things, and whether or not they should have taken some of those points. But I'll let you start here.
So just to backpack on the sort of Purdy take, what I don't think we talk about enough is the fact that I think a great quarterback, what defines a great quarterback, is someone who succeeds regardless of where they are. Like, it's one of the reasons I'm so high on Baker Mayfield. The fact that he was able to win on Cleveland. They've had more quarterbacks than most teams in NFL history, and still few have had the success besides like Otto Graham, and he played when TVs were in black and white. So something like that, to me, that shows I've always been of the mindset Baker Mayfield can be a franchise quarterback who wins games. Purdy was drafted late, and he was drafted late for a reason. He has all these limitations. Same thing with Tom Brady. I've always said this. If Tom Brady goes to other teams, I think he could have been good, but I don't think he would have been as good. Would he have been the greatest of all time? No, and I'll die on that hill. If you put Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers on a team that consistently good on the defensive end of the ball, I think they would be just as good, if not better. And I know that's a very controversial take, but regardless of that, my point here is just saying that situation matters more than anything, but that still doesn't mean you're a bad player. I don't think Brady's the greatest thing since sliced bread like everyone else. I still think he's one of the best of all time. Same thing with Purdy. I don't think he's an MVP candidate, but it's like I've said, he's more than deserved a Pro Bowl nod or even maybe a All-Pro nod. I'm not saying that he hasn't, but transcendently, when you look at things that jump off of paper, he does, as Wilson said, what doesn't he have going for him? He has an elite defensive line, the best linebacker tandem in the league. Now, the secondary is not good, but there's one thing on his team that isn't good. Great O-line, amazing running back, best receiving room in the league. He has a fullback who made one of the best catches of the playoffs. I mean, you can't give this guy more things to succeed with. So when we're talking about Purdy, it's like Cam Newton just doubled down again today on his game manager take and was talking essentially about how he doesn't even think Purdy's a top 10 player on his team. And I think there's an argument for that. I truly believe that you could sit there and find, I don't know if 10, I think that might be, I think you may have been hyperboling a little bit, but I definitely think there are 5 players on his team that are significantly better than Purdy. But that's not to downplay what he did. He had 2 dropped interceptions in this game as well. And his biggest play came from a dropped interception into a catch, and one of the craziest plays I've seen in recent history. So he got lucky, but he made some plays, like you said, that I have to give him credit for, because at the end of the day, he might have been one of the biggest reasons they were losing in the first half. But then in the second half, he made sure without a shadow of a doubt that he wasn't going to be the reason they lost. And I can respect that a lot. So that's just kind of my take with Purdy that I wanted to say.
And I think there's just always a middle ground, right? There's this world of realism that we can live in without having to be on one of these black and white sides of the argument, right? You and I don't think Brock Purdy is an MVP caliber player because we don't think he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. That's not to say he can't be somewhere in between the 12th and 18th best, right? I think Purdy is right on that line of above average quarterback, and I'd be curious to see him in a different system, a different scheme. But, just people don't like hypotheticals, right? So on the 49ers, yes, I do think he's an above average quarterback. But again, I think there are just still a number of quarterbacks who take above him. We don't even have to go through the list, but Mahomes, Jackson, Burrow, Allen, Herbert. In the NFC, I think it gets a little bit more controversial, but I'd probably take Hurts. I'd probably take Jared Goff, right? And, I think it's just so interesting because people want to make it like you either think he is just the only reason the Niners are winning or he has to be the weakest link. And the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? He makes mistakes, but he has been able to make up for those mistakes. And he hasn't cost them a game in this postseason run yet. And so, with that, the quarterback, we always call it one of the most valuable positions on the football field. He's obviously going to get a lot of the credit and a lot of the blame when they're not doing well. And when they find themselves in the Super Bowl, I think, I have to give him credit because I've been a little lower on him, but that's not to say I don't think he's an above average quarterback. I just think it's so interesting that everyone has to make the Purdy conversation so controversial. But I'll turn over to the Lions side of things here real quickly. Obviously, the 4th down calls, kind of the biggest controversy coming out of this game for the Lions. And I have been so high on consistency as a head coach. I think if something is your motto, then you've got to stick with it. And I think what I failed to account for and what I would have changed in this game is I think you should stick to it, and you can stick to it without crossing the line. And I think what Campbell did in this one is he crossed the line a couple times. I think there's a huge difference between going up 2 scores and 3 scores in a game. 2 scores, I think the way the offense plays is just a little different than when it's 3 scores, even if one of those scores is a field goal. And I think for Campbell, multiple times in this game to kind of go for kind of the kill shot instead of just being a little bit more conservative. I understand it's been in his blood all year, but I also think I read something that it was like that's a little bit too robotic, right? Like if you're just going to do one thing, then why do you have a head coach? And I read that and I kind of changed my opinion on this a little bit because going into the game, I would have said Campbell should go on every 4th down just the way he has all year. But seeing how it kind of really affected the momentum in that game and just how it led to a series of mistakes for the Lions and how the Niners were able to capitalize, I do think particularly that first one, he really should have gone for the field goal. And I don't want to take away from, what the Lions did and how I think of Campbell as a coach. I think he should be the head coach, but I think that's a mistake that really cost them.
No, I agree in some capacity, but I also disagree from the standpoint of I also though believe to sticking to your guns, like going for all those 4th downs is what got him here. It's the mindset that he preaches. So I understand it from that perspective. My perspective of it though was the way they were getting them was they passed on all of them. I am just such a big fan of how they run the ball. And when you have Penei Sewell, who's in my opinion the best tackle, not even just right tackle, but the best tackle in football, and you have 4th and under 3 yards and you don't run it either of those attempts, that was crazy to me. I mean, they converted what was it? I think it was a 3rd and 12 by running. And you're telling me you don't want to go for a 4th and 3 with the run. It's just, to me, that was, am all for the decision, right, to go for it on fourth if that's what you think, that if that's what your team is, right? It's just like the Ravens, how they love to kick long field goals because like we have Justin Tucker, we can do it. I get sticking to your guns in the way you have a philosophy. I truly believe you need to stick to that. But to me, it was more you are a team that's made your money running the football. You had 4 more rushing attempts than you did passing completions. Why was the run game not as big of a part in that second half, even if it's getting stopped? Look, Jamison Williams broke the game open in the first half. Why aren't we doing more things like that? So I just want to say for Dan Campbell, the fact that we're all talking about the not all of us, but the media is almost like bashing him, essentially saying like, oh, what a fluke year for them. They aren't going to come back. And I just think that's crazy. What Dan Campbell has done in Detroit has done to me something similar to making the Cleveland Browns a good football team. I have always said the coaches who find a way to win a Super Bowl with the Lions or Browns are going to go down as 2 of the greatest of all time, even if they're only a good coach for a year, just out of principle. You have to overcome organizational incompetence with either of those teams to win a Super Bowl, and that's what Dan Campbell's doing. So we question these fourth down decisions, but maybe that's what he needed to turn the culture around, to show them that he believes in them. For the last 50-some years, everyone's told the Lions they don't believe in him. Dan Campbell comes in there and he goes, look, I believe in you guys so much, I'm not going to punt the ball ever again. So I get it from that standpoint, and we never take emotion or president into right. It's always, what have you done for me recently? He lost the game going for fourth down, so that's all there is to it. He's changed the culture in one of the most damned football teams in the National Football League, one of the worst teams of all time. In 3 years, he's turned around the organization and just rewritten everything about them. And we're acting like it was a fluke year. The Dan Campbell slander needs to stop. I won't stand for it because I'm not even his biggest fan. I do not think he's an amazing head coach. Like, I don't put him in the S tier of head coaches. He's just a cut below, in my opinion. But what he's done is so remarkable that I think we need to give him his flowers and say, look, Ben Johnson's staying too. He knows something special here, right? I mean, that's insane. This dude could be a head coach making $10 million somewhere, but he wanted to stay because he has that much faith in the offense being able to repeat. That's a culture. That's what Dan Campbell did, and no other coach has been able to do. So shame on you if you're bashing Dan Campbell this day for going on fourth down when maybe that's what he had to do to freaking get this team into a conference championship. Just crazy to me, the amount of talk about him on this, the week after the game.
Yeah, and if one of those fourth downs gets converted, all of a sudden the conversation is so different, right? It is, a game of inches, a game of plays that can swing one way or another, and it can quickly change the narrative. But I agree, and while I might have made a different call on one of those fourth downs, I'm also not Dan Campbell, and for it, I like him even more, I think. You just did such a good job speaking about the culture, but, his first year there, I think they were 3-13-1. The second year last year, we know they were 9-8, and this year to go to 12-5, just that consistent, rise and the play and the belief. And, that offense has done that front office has done an incredible job at drafting incredible talent. They've got so many young guys that should make this offense and even the defense good for the next number of years. I love Ben Johnson staying there. And he talked about it in his presser afterwards at how hard it is to get back to that spot. But I also think him having that perspective in a game where they're coming off this incredibly emotional and raw loss, for him to kind of have that really just crystal clear perspective on what they were able to accomplish and how hard it will be next year. But also, and he said it again, like he believes they can do it again. And I think for those reasons, he should be the head coach of the Lions. And even if, you or I don't think he's the best X's and O's guys, I think he's the best culture option for them and for the city of Detroit and the football franchise of the Lions, right? That's the guy you need, right? I think, even if they had a Kyle Shanahan, do I think they win that game? No, because I think they got there on the back of Dan Campbell and that belief that he really instilled in his players from the first day he walked into that and into that environment. So credit to the Lions, an incredible season, and that sets us up for the Super Bowl preview.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports, and as we close out our second to last NFL pod for the 2023-24 season, we are going into the Chiefs-Niners Super Bowl. Obviously, this is a game everyone's going to be talking about for the next week and a half, and so, we thought we'd throw our hat in the ring. Aren't dedicating a whole show to this just because, this is about as predictable as a Super Bowl as one can have. The Chiefs have been in it the last 7 years, and for what feels like, and the Niners, again, have been in the NFC Championship every year, it seems like. So just to make things simple, we just thought we'd include it in this episode like we have for the previous installments, as well as, again, there's everyone in the world's talking about this, and these teams, we've talked about them in this capacity for the last 10 years at least. So we just thought we would throw our hat in the ring, and not in as a major capacity as we usually do, but just because, again, I mean, let's be honest, this is the Super Bowl no one wanted. And I'm going to say that with full transparency. This is, when I was looking at the playoff slate, this is the one Super Bowl I didn't want to have happen more than anything else, but had the most likely odds to happen. So part of that also is my own reluctance to want to cover this. But regardless, Wilson, I'll open up the floor to you. What do you see as we look ahead to this Chiefs 49ers matchup?
Yeah, this one's interesting. I think a year ago I had an exacta bet as the Chiefs Niners as a Super Bowl matchup, and I guess I was a year early to it because obviously we're getting it this year. I think there's a number of things that are interesting about this matchup. We had actually a really early preview to this game, kind of at the midpoint. I think it was either week 6 or week 7, excuse me, of a year ago is when the Niners had just acquired CMC, and that's a game that the Chiefs took away relatively easily. But I think you can kind of scrap that just given that they hadn't even had C-Mac for a full week, and obviously these rosters are a little different. I'm really interested to kind of see the Niners offense match up with this Chiefs defense, right? For as good as the Chiefs defense has been all year, and they have been remarkable, and I've really harped on how good I think that unit has been. I think this is a matchup that the Niners will like favorably, just given their kind of weapons they have at their arsenal, and just a number of different playmakers they have. I think it's a little different, and just also the game being in Vegas, I think plays a huge factor for me. We saw the Dolphins as an offense that had a bunch of weapons with a game manager-esque similar quarterback to Purdy and Tua. And I think we really just saw the weather throw the Dolphins off their game entirely, right? They didn't run the ball remotely close to what they've been doing all year. And we saw Tua really just kind of throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage all game, really nothing downfield, just really uncomfortable in that cold weather. So I'm curious to see how this Chiefs defense matches up with an offense that has so many weapons. And on the flip side of thing, I'm curious to see whether or not the Chiefs continue with this kind of conservative style of offense they've been playing in the final game of the year, right? We kind of know in the Super Bowl, all bets are off, right? Players are going to put everything out on the line. Mahomes will probably see him scramble in quite a few situations because he's not going to be necessarily concerned with getting a little bit dinged up, knowing that he has a full offseason ahead of him. So I'm really kind of curious to see the offensive game plan going into the game. And I think the Chiefs are pretty notorious for setting that game plan a full week before they get to the Super Bowl city, and really just kind of taking a week to get adjusted, getting out into that arena and just kind of running their stuff in there, getting familiar with the field, the conditions, and just seeing what the environment will be like out there. So, the Chiefs are probably finalizing that offensive game plan right now as we speak. So I'm really kind of curious to see those two elements, just kind of the matchups. And I know that's very easy to say, right? Of course, that's what we're looking for in any matchup. But what are your thoughts going into this one?
I don't have, honestly, too much to say. To me, this game's pretty cut and dry. I do not believe in San Francisco, and the Chiefs have just consistently delivered and played the best postseason of any team. And I think, once again, I think it'll be a game similar to the Ravens game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored. I think it's going to be very low scoring, very boring, very take what the defense gives. That being said, if you're letting Sam Laporta on a bum knee get 9 catches for 97, you're going to have to double team Travis Kelce the whole game. So now you're double teaming Travis Kelce, or you're leaving him one-on-one with your stud linebackers. Either way, if you're going to, put all that attention to Kelce, so he's either going to pick up a corner, right? Or a corner and a linebacker or a safety. One, I think he wins the matchup regardless. Two, that's going to open up everything else. Isaiah Pacheco has 2 weeks to get healthy. When that dude runs well, that Chiefs offensive line is an insane unit. The interior of that line is maybe the best interior in the entire league. So throw all of that together. In my eyes, this is going to be a game. If I had to guess, Mahomes will have around 220. Kelce will have around 80. I think Rashee Rice could potentially have a big game in complement to Travis Kelce. Considering, again, San Francisco's secondary is one of the only things you can really attack. But with Travis Kelce being such a decoy, I just think they're going to be able to run the ball down their throat, because even if Kelce isn't the greatest blocker, what he provides is something you have to watch. He's so good at, doing the little fake block, going out, becoming a receiver, catching the ball, or just being a receiver. The dude's unbelievable. So I think Pacheco breaks 100 from scrimmage and has like 2 touchdowns. I really just think he's going to take over this game for the Chiefs.
Yeah, as much as I'd like to deliver a shocker and pick the Niners, I think I have to stay consistent. If I pick the Chiefs, it's kind of odd to abandon them going into the Super Bowl, knowing that it's Andy Reid off of a bye. And we see the offense has kind of clicked better in this postseason than it had in kind of throughout the regular season. And as good as I think the Niners defense is, I think I would have heralded Baltimore's defensive unit as a whole as better than this Niners one. And we saw kind of, the Chiefs what they were able to do with Kelsey. And I think you're right there. I think they'll be able to do something similar to the Niners defense. So I am going to have to go ahead and pick the Chiefs here. Real shocker, but I'm with you. I think this will be quite the opposite of what we saw last year, where last year kind of turned into a barn burner, lots of offensive scoring. I think this one's going to be a lot more defense. And I think in particular for the Niners, I don't want to say Brock Purdy's going to get exposed, but this is a really, really consistent Chiefs defense. And I just question if he's going to be able to make the number of plays he'd have to make in order to kind of overcome the Chiefs. So I'm going to pick the Chiefs in this one. I don't really like giving out scores, but I'd say somewhere in the 21 to 17 range.
Yeah. Well, and you also have to remember when you're playing the league sweetheart, they are going to get every penalty to go their way. Just like they did in Baltimore a week ago, the Chiefs will win the penalty game. L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie are both great corners. And what is the one, to me, the most consistent factor among what makes a good corner is a corner who knows how to get away with holding. If you understand what the refs are looking for, you know what the crews are looking for or what the crews like to call, it is a huge matchup. As well as, you always wear the opposing team gloves, so if they don't see the jersey tug as much. But McDuffie and Sneed are both great at that. I think now Debo to me is going to be their X factor. If Debo has a game like he did against the Lions, I think there's a chance they win, just because Debo's a running back who plays receiver. The dude's physique is insane. And as great as Sneed and McDuffie are, the dude's just a freak of nature. But I think Ayuk is going to get minimized to a capacity where he's, really the big play guy in terms of downfield shots. I don't think he's really going to get those opportunities in this game. Christian McCaffrey is playing Drew Tranquil, who coming off a great game. Nick Bolton, Willie Gay. That's a very talented tackling linebacker core. Obviously, Chris Jones is one of the most dominant interior linemen in football. And in my opinion, again, San Fran's line's amazing, but it's especially the tackles and the outside, because what they do with use check up the middle is impressive. But, Chris Jones is going to prevent all of that. To me, this game it's like you said, I don't think even Brock Purdy is going to be exposed. I think the Niners are going to be exposed. They've had a lot of close games that shouldn't have been close. They should have dominated that Packers game, but they just let the Packers outplay them at every level. If you're going to let Jordan Love do that against you, Mahomes is going to have a field day. And look, Jared Goff had a great game, and with two key drops from Josh Reynolds being in reverse, he has 330 yards, another passing touchdown, and a win under his belt. One of the best days of any of the quarterbacks in this round. So I just think it's pretty easy to look at what San Fran's done versus what the Chiefs have done and see, again, have the Chiefs gotten everything to go in their favor? Yeah, but they're the league sweetheart. You have to expect that, even though San Fran's favored, if I'm them, I'm going into this game feeling like the underdog. That's how I think you have to approach the game as them. You cannot approach it as, okay, we're the favorite, let's play like it. If I'm them, I'm playing like the dog and I'm clawing the whole time, but I still just don't see them winning.
Yeah, that's absolutely the mentality the Niners have to take into this one. And I really agree with kind of your analysis of how the matchups will happen between the offense and the defense. The Chiefs, what they've been incredible at all year is really taking away a lot of the big plays, right? Because, they have such a good secondary with those corners and Sneed and McDuffie. And as well as just the speed, right? The speed at which their linebackers are able to get up the field. They've been able to slow down the run for a lot of their opponents. Purdy's a guy who, you mentioned the Ayuk connection. I think Purdy's best chemistry he has on that roster is with Ayuk on just some of those deep routes, fade routes. And I think the Chiefs are really just going to, be able to sit on top of those. And I think once you start taking away some of those things for a younger, less experienced quarterback in this spot, I think it'll just bode a little bit of trouble. As well as I just think the Chiefs secondary just matches up really well with the playmakers once they get the ball after the catch. So again, I'm taking the Chiefs here. And I guess by the sound of it, you're taking the Chiefs reluctantly as well.
Yeah, when I'm looking at this matchup, I really do think this matchup falls onto two players, namely, as I said, Isaiah Pacheco and Deebo Samuel. I think whichever one of them remains a crucial part of the offense is going to be the team that wins.
All right, very cool. Well, then I think we'll end off this kind of championship game recap as well as the Super Bowl preview with, I put it as a bonus take for Drake's devastation. But really, this is just my moment of sympathy for here. Drake really had to do this podcast under protest. This is really not the matchup he wanted to see, excuse me. So I just wanted to say thank you for actually getting on here. I somehow lucked into being right on all 6 of the games that we picked. Through the divisional round and the championship game weekend, simply by virtue of believing in teams that you really cannot stand. So with that, I just, I thank the Lord for my luck in this. And I think it gives me the credibility to continue to get on here up against your NFL acumen and knowledge, because you definitely can run circles around me. But I've gotten lucky with the Chiefs, so I thank them for that. And I thank you for getting on here today.
Yeah, no. I told all my friends, I told my family, I told everyone, I was like, I will not be watching the game on Super Bowl Sunday. I told Wilson, look, I have an objective promise because of this podcast. If I wasn't doing the podcast, this isn't hyperbole. I would not watch this game, even if it's a 57-60 shootout, a game for the ages. I wouldn't watch it out of principle, because just like when I didn't watch the last Cavs Warriors, I watch sports for enjoyment. If I don't think I'm going to enjoy it, or I have a reason that I will not enjoy it, I'm not going to watch it. Now with this podcast, obviously things are a little different. So our compromise, I told Wilson, I first told him, I don't think I can do it. But then I was like, you know what? I have to be a professional. This is something we do. This is something we're passionate about and we want to succeed. Got to have Super Bowl coverage. So I told Wilson that my amendment will be watching the condensed Game Pass version on NFL Plus. So I have none of the semantics, none of the talking about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, none of the halftime show, none of the commercials. I don't want any of that, because I don't want this game to be something on my docket. These are 2 franchises I can't stand. One wins too much historically. One wins too much recently. And I'm bored with both these teams. Lions Ravens would have been a dream come true. You have a 2-time MVP who was asked to switch positions at the NFL draft just a few years prior, and you have a team that literally in most of our parents' lifetime hadn't made a Super Bowl or a championship game on a potential to make it. That would have been one of the coolest Super Bowl storylines of all time, and we were robbed of it by 2 perennially successful franchises. One obviously being more recent, but San Fran's just pretty much been good for forever. So I don't, this sucks. I'm just going to be honest. The Super Bowl's like my favorite Sunday of the year every year. And I'm just really bummed out that this is what it came to. And I was really hoping for the Lions at least to pull through there. And it looked like they might have, but definitely disappointed. And that's all I got to say. So,
and I'll vouch for Drake. He's not being hyperbolic. He really did not want this matchup to happen. If I know one thing about Drake, is that he does not like seeing the same thing over and over. A couple years ago, we were talking basketball. He mentioned the Cavs Warriors. I think each year I started getting less texts around the finals every year, because Drake started watching less and less finals NBA basketball. And I think that holds true kind of for just seeing the Chiefs and the Niners every single year, and these kind of, I guess, in the round of the Final Four. So, it'll be an interesting weekend to say the least, and I'm excited to see Drake wear Mahomes' jersey on the next NFL podcast. That'll be a good one.
And I'm excited to not have to cover the NFL for another 7 months on a game-by-game capacity.
And so with that, then that'll close out our season 3, episode 14 of our NFL coverage. Again, we always thank you guys for listening. We have really, really appreciated the support, particularly on the TikTok side of things, but also on the YouTube. It's just really cool getting engaged with you guys and kind of hear the conversation around sports. So we thank you for listening, and we will hope to see you back here soon.